30 days. Grant Halverson slapped the demolition order onto the library table. After that, this place is gone. Ethan Walker, a homeless veteran with a bad back and a German shepherd named Ranger, stared at the paper without blinking. Maggie from the diner covered her mouth. Judge Ruth Bellamy went still. Then Ranger walked to the west wall, lowered his nose to the floor, and scratched once. Everyone turned. Ethan whispered, "What is it, boy?" Behind that wall was something powerful men had hidden for nearly a century, and once Ethan opened it, nobody in Ashford Creek would be able to pretend anymore. Ethan Walker had learned, over the years, that a man could lose a great deal without making much noise. A house did not vanish like smoke. It went through papers first, signatures, phone calls not returned, a polite letter from a bank in a white envelope, a realtor's lockbox on a door your father once painted blue. By the time the world called it foreclosure, the thing itself had already happened quietly inside him. So, on a cold November night in Ashford Creek, Pennsylvania, Ethan stood beneath the dead light of a bus station awning with $52 in his wallet, a faded army duffel at his feet, and a German shepherd pressed against his left knee as if holding him upright. Ranger was 7 years old, black and tan, broad in the chest, gray around the muzzle before his time. His right hind leg stiffened in the cold, an old injury that made him walk with a small hitch, dignified but noticeable. Ethan knew that walk because he had one too, especially when the weather turned wet. They were a matched pair in that way, both pretending the past did not live in their bones. Across the street, the diner sign blinked once, then went dark. The last bus had left 40 minutes ago. The shelter on Harlan Avenue was full. The church basement that sometimes opened during storms had a handwritten note taped to the door, closed for repairs. Ethan had read it twice, not because he expected it to change, but because a man who had fixed roofs, pipes, boilers, and broken locks for most of his working life had trouble accepting that every door in town could be unavailable at the same time. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the small metal dog tag he carried there. Mason Reed. The name was worn soft at the edges from Ethan's thumb. Some men carried photographs. Some kept letters. Ethan carried a piece of stamped metal from a friend who had once told him, "You're too stubborn to disappear." Ethan almost laughed at that now. It came out as fog. Ranger looked up at him, amber eyes steady, not pitying. That was one mercy dogs had over people. They did not ask you to explain your ruin before deciding whether to stay. "We'll figure it out," Ethan said, though his voice had the thinness of a man speaking into an empty room. Ranger's ears shifted, not toward Ethan, toward the hill behind the station, where an old service road climbed past shuttered storefronts and bare maple trees trembling in the wind. Ethan frowned. "No, there's nothing up there." Ranger stood. Slowly, with purpose, the leash tightened in Ethan's hand. Not a hard pull, not panic, just insistence. Ethan had seen that look before in cleaner years, when Ranger still wore a working vest and could read a room faster than most men could read a sentence. The dog took 3 steps, stopped, glanced back. Ethan stayed where he was. Rain ticked against the metal awning. Somewhere down the block, a loose sign creaked on its chain. "Ranger," he warned softly. The shepherd did not move, he simply waited, patient as a promise. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. His back ached. His stomach felt hollow. He was tired in a way sleep would not fix. But Ranger had never led him anywhere without a reason, not once. So Ethan bent, lifted the duffel, and followed. The road climbed past an abandoned hardware store, a boarded pharmacy, and a brick building with its windows painted over from the inside. Ashford Creek had once been the kind of town where people knew which porch light belonged to which family, where mill whistles marked the day, and every Friday smelled faintly of coal dust and fried onions. Now it had the look of a place waiting to be bought by someone who had never loved it. Ranger kept moving, nose low, shoulders forward, rain shining along his coat. At the top of the hill, the street narrowed and disappeared beneath a tunnel of old maples. Their branches bent over the road like tired hands. Ethan was about to turn back when Ranger stopped. Set back from the road, half hidden behind hedges grown wild and tall, stood a building Ethan had never noticed, though he had lived in this town for nearly 6 years. It was long and low, white paint peeling in strips, windows boarded, roof sagging at one corner but not beaten yet. A rusted iron gate hung open as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. Above the entrance, a wooden sign swung in the wind. its letters nearly swallowed by time. Ethan stepped closer, wiped rain from his eyes, and read what was left. Mercer Free Library, founded 1929. He stared at the words longer than he meant to. A library, of all things. Ethan had spent 12 years fixing county libraries after leaving the service, replacing bulbs in reading rooms, resetting thermostats, sanding tables scarred by decades of elbows and coffee cups. He knew the smell of old paper the way some men knew church incense. Ranger climbed the steps and stood at the door. The latch hung loose. Ethan should have walked away. Trespassing was still trespassing, even when you had nowhere to sleep. But then the rain came harder, a cold sheet across his shoulders, and Ranger looked back at him with an expression so calm it almost hurt. Ethan pushed the door. It opened with a sigh. Inside was darkness, dust, and the faint dry scent of cedar shelves. Ranger entered first, silent. Ethan followed with the duffel in one hand and the leash in the other. The floorboards groaned beneath his boots. Rows of books emerged slowly from the dark, still standing, still waiting. Near the back wall, Ranger stopped and lifted his head, staring at something Ethan could not yet see. Ethan whispered, "What did you find, boy?" The old building answered with a soft creak above them, like it had been holding its breath for years. Ethan stood just inside the doorway, listening to the rain drum against the boarded windows, while the old library slowly appeared around him, piece by piece, the way a memory returns when you stop trying to force it. The room was larger than it looked from outside. Shelves rose from floor to ceiling on both sides, their edges silvered with dust, their books packed tight and patient, as if no one had told them the world had moved on. A long oak table sat in the center, scarred by cup rings and knife-thin scratches. 4 chairs remained around it, one tipped over, one missing a back slat. 2 still pulled close, as though the last people who sat there had only stepped away for coffee. Ethan let the door settle shut behind him. The latch did not catch, but the weight of the wood held against the frame. It was enough. Tonight, enough was a sacred word. Ranger moved ahead without sniffing wildly or circling like a lost dog. He walked down the center aisle with the quiet seriousness of an old soldier entering a place that deserved respect. His paws left faint marks in the dust. Near the far wall, he paused beneath a framed flag, its glass cracked from corner to corner. Ethan lifted his flashlight. The flag was faded, folded in a triangle, with a brass plate below it so tarnished the words were almost gone. He rubbed his sleeve over the metal and read, "For those who came home changed." Something tightened in his throat before he could stop it. He looked away quickly, the way men do when a room gets too close to the truth. "Just one night," he told Ranger again, softer this time. The dog lowered himself beside the table, front legs stretched, eyes still open. Ethan crossed the room slowly. There was a front desk with an old stamp pad dried to stone, a card catalog cabinet with dozens of tiny drawers, a cracked globe tilted toward the Pacific, and a newspaper rack holding yellowed editions from 1998. The newest headline mentioned a mill closure, a county budget fight, and a plan to modernize public services. Ethan had seen words like that before: modernize, restructure, streamline. They were clean words people used when they did not want to say abandon. In a corner near the back, he found a reading alcove built beneath a tall window covered in warped boards. The bench cushion was stiff and split along one seam, but the wood below was dry. He set down his duffel, eased himself onto the bench, and felt the familiar blade of pain travel across his lower back. For a moment he sat very still, breathing through it. Ranger rose, crossed the floor, and lay at his feet, his body warm against Ethan's boots. Ethan reached down and rested a hand on the dog's head. "You picked a strange hotel." Ranger blinked once, unimpressed. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. From his duffel he took out a clean pair of socks, a bottle of pills, a dented can of tuna he had been saving, and Mason Reed's dog tag. He held the tag in his palm until it warmed. Mason would have liked this place, he thought. Not because it was grand. It was not. Not because it was safe. It barely was. Mason would have liked it because it had endured. The roof still held. The shelves still stood. The books had waited in darkness without complaint. There was something decent about that. Ethan opened the tuna and shared half with Ranger, placing the fish on an old index card because he could not bring himself to put food directly on the floor of a library. The thought struck him as ridiculous, and then strangely comforting. A man could lose his address and still have manners. He could sleep in an abandoned building and still care where a book belonged. After they ate, Ethan walked the aisles with his flashlight. Fiction, local history, repair manuals, veterans' benefits guides from decades ago. Books on carpentry, mining safety, first aid, grief. He stopped at that last word, grief. The spine was faded blue, the title nearly rubbed off. He slid it halfway out, then pushed it back. Not tonight. Some doors inside a man needed more than a broken latch to open. The rain softened near midnight. Wind pressed at the boards, making them murmur. Ethan returned to the alcove, pulled his coat tight, and leaned against the wall. Ranger settled close, facing the room, guarding nothing and everything. Just before sleep took him, Ethan looked at the shadowed shelves and felt, for the first time in weeks, not welcome exactly, but not refused. In the dark, that was close enough to mercy. Before Ethan Walker became the man sleeping in a forgotten library, he had been the man people called when a building needed saving. Not the sort of saving that earned applause, quieter than that. A furnace coughing in January. A roof seam splitting before a storm. A reading room light flickering above an old man's newspaper. A back door that would not lock. For 12 years after leaving the Army, Ethan worked maintenance for the Ashford County Library System, driving a white county van from branch to branch with a toolbox in the back and Ranger riding beside him like a supervisor who took the job personally. Ethan liked broken things when they were honest about being broken. Pipes leaked, hinges rusted, wood warped. You found the problem, took it apart, cleaned what could be cleaned, replaced what could not, and put it back together with patience. People were harder. They smiled while leaving. They promised while calculating. They said words like temporary when they meant gone. After the service, everyone told Ethan he should be proud, and he tried. He really did. He hung his uniform in the closet. He answered "Yes, Mom" at appointments. He learned to sleep with a fan on so silence would not press too closely against his ears. He took the library job because libraries did not demand much from a man except care. They had rules, but gentle ones. Return what you borrowed. Keep your voice low. Leave the place better than you found it. That seemed like a life he could understand. Ranger came to him 3 years after Ethan came home, after an old K-9 program folded and the county veteran office asked if he could take in a retired shepherd with a stiff leg and a habit of watching doorways. Ethan said he would try him for a week. By the second night, Ranger was sleeping across the bedroom door, and Ethan had stopped waking up with his hand clenched around nothing. They did not heal each other in any dramatic way. Healing, Ethan learned, was mostly repetition. Morning coffee, walk the dog, go to work, tighten the loose bolt, eat something with protein, answer the phone even when you did not want to. For a while, that was enough. Then came the fall. It happened at the Westbrook branch on a bright March afternoon, ridiculous in its ordinariness. Ethan was clearing wet leaves from a flat roof drain before the next rain came in. His boot slipped on a patch of green moss hidden under the leaves. He caught himself halfway, twisted hard, and felt something in his lower back give like a rope snapping inside a wall. He did not cry out. That was the first mistake. He climbed down, drove himself to urgent care, and told the nurse he had pulled something. Men like Ethan were fluent in making pain sound smaller than it was. The bills arrived before the insurance decision did. The county put him on unpaid leave, then reduced positions, then sent a letter thanking him for his years of service. His brother Derek came around during those weeks, bringing groceries and the careful voice of a man auditioning for kindness. "Let me help with the paperwork," Derek said. "Just until you're steady." Ethan was tired, medicated, ashamed of needing help, and still foolish enough to believe blood meant safety. So he signed, not everything, not knowingly, but enough. A limited power of attorney, Derek called it. Practical, necessary, best for everyone. The phrase became a door closing. 2 months later, Ethan came home from a physical therapy appointment and found a realtor's sign in front of the small blue house his father had built with his own hands. The porch swing was gone. The mailbox had been painted black. Derek would not meet his eyes when he explained. "You couldn't keep up with it," he said. "I did what had to be done." Ethan remembered looking at the house, then at Ranger standing beside him, ears low but steady, and feeling something stranger than anger. It was a kind of quiet amazement, as if he had finally understood how little a man's life could weigh in someone else's hands. After that, the days narrowed. A motel for 2 weeks. then the truck, then favors that ran out. People did not turn cruel all at once. They got busy. They stopped replying. They said, "Call me Monday," and Monday became weather, then winter, then nothing. Ethan kept Mason's dog tag, Ranger's leash, and the habit of standing up straight when anyone looked at him too long. Pride was not shelter, but it was the last roof he knew how to keep from collapsing. And now, in the dark of Mercer Free Library, with rain moving over the old roof like fingers over a scar, Ethan understood something he had not been ready to admit. He had not wandered into this place because he was finished. Maybe he had come because some broken things were still waiting for the right hands. Morning entered Mercer Free Library in thin gold strips, slipping through cracks in the boards and laying itself across the dust as if the sun had come quietly, not wanting to wake the place too fast. Ethan opened his eyes to the ache in his back, the stiffness in his hands, and the steady warmth of Ranger curled against his boots. For a moment he did not remember where he was. Then he saw the shelves, the long table, the cracked flag glass, the old card catalog standing in the corner like a chest of small locked memories. He breathed in the smell of paper, cedar, rain-damp plaster, and something else beneath it all, something stubbornly clean, not fresh, not new. Clean in the way an old coat can still hold the shape of the person who wore it well. Ranger was already awake, watching the room. His ears lifted when Ethan shifted. "All right," Ethan muttered, pushing himself upright with a quiet grunt. "Let's see what kind of trouble you dragged us into." The first inspection was habit. Ethan checked the front door, then the windows, then the ceiling line where water stains bloomed brown across the plaster. The roof had leaks, but not everywhere. The west corner was bad. The front reading room was dry. One pipe under the small back sink gave a weak cough when he turned the handle, then released a thin stream of rusty water that cleared after a minute. Ethan stared at it longer than necessary. Running water felt like a miracle when a man had spent the last 2 days measuring his dignity by which gas station restroom would let him in. He washed his face, cupped water over the back of his neck, and let the cold bring him fully back to himself. In a storage room behind the desk, he found boxes of books, a broom with half its bristles bent sideways, a dented metal bucket, old rags, and a toolbox so rusted the latch had to be coaxed open. There were nails, a flathead screwdriver, twine, 2 hinges, and a roll of tape gone brittle at the edges. Not much, enough, that word again, enough. He took inventory the way he once took inventory of damaged buildings after storms. Door latch loose, south window board failing, reading table stable, alcove usable. Back room dry, electrical uncertain, fireplace decorative, not safe. Mold in the cushion, manageable if removed. Floorboards soft near the west wall. Ranger followed him from room to room, never rushing, occasionally lowering his nose to the floor, occasionally looking back as if asking why Ethan was moving so slowly. "Some of us only have 2 good legs," Ethan told him. Ranger gave him a look that seemed to say he was being generous with the word good. By mid-morning, hunger pressed hard enough to end the inspection. Ethan counted the bills in his wallet on the oak table. 2 20s, 1 10, 2 singles. $52, now wrinkled from rain and worry. He walked to a corner market 3 blocks away and bought a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, 2 cans of soup, a bottle of cheap pain reliever, a gallon of water, and a small bag of dog food. $14.68. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes and a name tag reading Luis, glanced at Ranger waiting outside and added 2 beef sticks without scanning them. Ethan noticed. So did Luis. Neither man said anything. Sometimes kindness survived best when nobody made it perform. Back at the library, Ethan fed Ranger first, then ate a folded slice of bread with peanut butter while standing at the front desk. He meant to sit. Instead, he found himself wiping the counter. One rag led to another, dust lifted in pale clouds. He sneezed, cursed softly, then kept going. He cleared the table, righted the fallen chair, stacked loose books by subject, and carried the moldy cushion outside behind the building. He swept a path from the door to the reading alcove, then another from the alcove to the sink, then another between the shelves. Work changed the air, not dramatically. No choir of light came through the boards. No great revelation landed in his hands, but the room shifted. A place that had been abandoned began, inch by inch, to look expected. Ranger settled near the entrance, head high, watching Ethan move with the solemn approval of a foreman. Late in the afternoon, while cleaning beside the door, Ethan found a tarnished brass plaque, half hidden beneath grime. He rubbed it with his sleeve, then with water, then with the corner of a rag until the letters surfaced. Mercer Free Library. For those who served, labored, and were forgotten. Ethan sat back on his heels. The words did not strike loudly. They entered quietly and stayed. He thought of the VA waiting room, the motel clerk, Derek's careful voice. The way people looked through a man once he no longer had a clean address to offer them. Ranger came over and touched his nose to Ethan's shoulder. Ethan swallowed, then rested one hand against the plaque. "Well," he whispered, "somebody remembered." Outside, the wind moved through the maples. Inside, Ethan picked up the broom again. He had told Ranger they would stay one night. But by sunset, with 3 clean aisles behind him and the brass plaque shining faintly by the door, Ethan understood that survival had quietly become something else. Not hope, not yet. But purpose had come in low and steady, like a dog finding its way home. By the 3rd morning, Ethan had stopped pretending he was only cleaning because the dust bothered him. He rose before sunrise, washed at the little back sink, fed Ranger from a chipped ceramic bowl he had found in the storage room, and worked while the town below the hill slowly woke without knowing he was there. The front room had begun to change under his hands. The oak table showed a warm brown grain beneath the gray film. The chairs stood straight. The aisles were clear enough to walk through without brushing against fallen books. Even the air felt different, less trapped, as if the old building had taken one cautious breath and decided to try another. Ranger noticed it too. He moved through the library with a new alertness, no longer simply guarding Ethan, but studying the place. He would pause at certain shelves, lower his nose to the baseboards, then look back with that steady, unreadable expression that had gotten Ethan through more than one bad night. "Don't start," Ethan told him, tightening a screw on the front desk drawer. "I'm not adopting a building." Ranger gave a quiet huff and walked away. Around noon, while Ethan was sorting a stack of water-spotted repair manuals, he heard the sound: scratch, pause, scratch. Not frantic, not playful. Deliberate. He turned and found Ranger at the far end of the west wall, near a section of shelves packed with old county records, tax guides, and bound newspapers. The dog stood rigid, nose pressed near the floor, ears forward. Scratch, pause, scratch. Ethan set down the books. "What is it?" Ranger did not look at him. That was what made Ethan move faster. The shepherd was focused on the bottom of a tall shelf that looked, at first glance, no different from any other. But when Ethan knelt beside him and ran his fingers along the wood, he felt it. A draft, thin as a whispered secret, slipping through the seam behind the shelving. He frowned and brought the flashlight close. The screws holding the shelf to the wall were not like the others. Newer, maybe from the 70s or 80s, while the rest of the building still wore its age honestly. Ethan leaned back, studying the wall. "That's not sitting right." Ranger's tail gave one slow sweep, as if to say finally. Ethan found the rusted screwdriver from the storage room, then took out his own small multi-tool, the one he had carried for years out of habit. The first screw resisted, the second stripped halfway. By the fourth, his shoulder ached and his back sent a warning flare down one leg. He stopped, breathed through his teeth, and almost quit. Almost. Ranger stepped closer and rested his muzzle lightly against Ethan's arm. No drama. Just weight, just presence. Ethan tried again. The last screw gave with a dry crack. He pulled the shelf forward an inch. Dust poured down. Behind it, where there should have been plaster, was a narrow wooden door painted the same dull brown as the wall. No handle, only a small recessed latch hidden near the floor. Ethan stared at it. His heart began to move in a slower, heavier rhythm. Not fear exactly, recognition. Old places kept records, men kept secrets, families kept both when money was involved. He slid the latch. The door opened inward with a long, tired groan. The smell that came out was stale but dry, paper, ink, cedar oil, and time sealed away from light. Ranger stepped in first, calm as a guide. Ethan followed with the flashlight raised. The hidden room was small, barely larger than a storage closet, but it had been arranged with care. A narrow desk stood against the back wall. On it sat a black typewriter under a cloth, a green glass banker's lamp with no bulb, and a row of file boxes tied with cotton tape. Photographs lined one wall, their edges curled. Men in work coats, women in plain hats, veterans standing shoulder to shoulder outside this very building, faces solemn but not defeated. Above the desk hung a framed portrait of a man in his 30s, lean, unsmiling, one hand resting on a cane. His eyes fixed on the camera with the exhausted dignity of someone who had seen too much and still refused to look away. Beneath the portrait, written in careful ink, was a name, Samuel Mercer. Ethan picked up the first file box. The label read, Reading Circle, Returned Serviceman, 1930-1931. The second, Mill Widows Accounts. The third, Legal Letters, Do Not Destroy. His fingers paused there. Ranger lowered himself beside the desk, watching Ethan as if he had brought him not to a room, but to a witness. Ethan opened the box and found bundles of letters, ledger sheets, newspaper clippings, and a leather-bound journal. The first page was dated October 17, 1931. The handwriting was firm, slanted, precise. Ethan read the first line aloud before he could stop himself. A man who cannot read the paper placed before him is too easily robbed by someone smiling across the table. The words landed in the room and seemed to wake everything. Ethan looked at Ranger. The dog's amber eyes held steady. Outside, Ashford Creek went on with its ordinary afternoon. Cars passing, registers opening, coffee pouring, people forgetting what had been taken from whom. But inside the hidden room of Mercer Free Library, Ethan Walker understood that Ranger had not found a hiding place. He had found the beginning of a buried truth. Ethan spent the rest of that afternoon inside the hidden room, with the careful stillness of a man afraid one wrong breath might scatter the past. He did not read everything. Some documents were too brittle, some handwriting too faded, and some truths had the heavy feeling of doors that should be opened with both hands. Still, he learned enough to know Samuel Mercer had not built the library as a decoration for the town. He had built it like a lifeboat. There were ledgers for coal workers who had been paid short and could not prove it because they had never been taught to read their own wage slips. There were letters written on behalf of widows who had received bills they did not understand. There were forms for veterans trying to claim benefits with hands that shook too badly to hold a pen steady. Samuel had kept copies of everything, neat and dated, as if he knew one day memory would need evidence. Near sunset, Ethan carried one file box into the main room and set it on the oak table. Ranger followed, then paused at the front door before Ethan heard the knock. Not loud. 2 taps, a pause, then one more, like whoever stood outside knew better than to startle a man living on the edge of his nerves. Ethan went still. Ranger did not growl, but his body squared itself between Ethan and the entrance. Easy, Ethan whispered. He opened the door a few inches. On the step stood Maggie Doyle, owner of the Maple Rail Diner, wrapped in a green raincoat with a paper grocery sack in one arm and a thermos tucked beneath the other. She was 58, broad-shouldered, silver threaded through her dark hair, with the kind of face that had spent years listening to people say they were fine when they were anything but. "You planning to make me stand in the rain?" "Ethan Walker," she asked. Ethan blinked at her. Shame rose first, hot and useless, then suspicion. Then the tired knowledge that he did not have enough pride left to feed himself with. "How'd you find me?" Lewis at the market saw Ranger. Hard to miss a German shepherd with better manners than most customers. Her eyes moved past him into the library, not prying, just taking in the swept floor, the stacked books, the brass plaque near the door. "You been busy. I'm not staying." Maggie looked at the broom leaning against the desk, the clean table, the mended window board. "Sure," she held out the sack, soup, bread, coffee, a few cans for the dog. "And before you start looking wounded, I didn't bring charity, I brought dinner." Ethan did not move. Ranger, traitor that he was, stepped forward and sniffed the sack with polite interest. Maggie lowered her voice. "I know the difference between a man asking for help and a man being cornered by it. I'm not here to corner you." Something in Ethan's face shifted barely. The smallest surrender. He opened the door wider. Maggie entered like she remembered the place, though she had probably never seen it except from the road. Her boots left damp marks on the floor. She stopped beneath the cracked flag and read the tarnished plate. "For those who came home changed." Her mouth tightened, not with sadness exactly, but recognition. "My father used to say that about my uncle," she murmured. "Korea changed him. Town didn't know what to do with him after." Ethan set the food on the table. "This place knew." Maggie looked at him then. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then opened the file box. He showed her the ledgers, Samuel's journal, the photographs, the letters written for people who had been too poor, too tired or too ashamed to ask twice. Maggie removed her glasses from her coat pocket and read silently. The diner owner briskness drained from her face. In its place came something softer and older. "My grandmother talked about Mercer House," she said. "I thought it was just one of her stories. She said men came here after the mills broke them. Said women brought bills and left with answers. Said nobody got called stupid in this room." Ethan looked toward the shelves. People get robbed easiest when they are embarrassed to admit they don't understand the paper in front of them. Maggie tapped Samuel's journal with one finger. "That sounds like something worth remembering." They ate soup from mismatched mugs because Ethan had not found bowls. Ranger lay under the table, receiving pieces of bread as if he had negotiated a formal arrangement. Maggie did not ask where Ethan had slept before this. She did not ask about Derek, the house, the limp, the dog tag he kept rubbing through his coat pocket. She talked about the diner's bad freezer, the mayor's habit of making speeches too long, the old mill clock that still rang 2 minutes late. Ordinary things, merciful things. When she stood to leave, she placed a folded paper beside the thermos. Ethan opened it after she was gone. Inside was a phone number and 3 words, Judge Ruth Bellamy. Ethan stared at the name while Ranger rested his chin on the edge of the table. Outside, rain tapped the roof. Inside, for the first time, the secret was no longer his alone. The next morning, Ethan woke to a sound that did not belong to the library. Not rain, not Ranger's nails on the floor, not the old pipes ticking awake in the walls. This sound was heavier, cleaner, official. Tires on wet gravel, a truck door closing. Then footsteps on the front steps, slow and certain, the way men walk when they believe the ground has already agreed with them. Ranger rose before Ethan did, not barking, only standing between the oak table and the entrance, his body still as a line drawn in ink. Ethan pushed himself up from the reading alcove, his back stiff, his shirt wrinkled, his hands smelling faintly of dust and old paper. Through the cracked glass beside the door, he saw a man in a dark wool coat looking up at the sign as if measuring it for removal. The man was tall, late 40s, clean-shaven, with silver at the temples and expensive boots that had not known much mud. Behind him stood a white pickup with the words Halverson Development printed on the door in blue letters, neat enough to feel unfriendly. Ethan opened the door before the man could knock. "Can I help you?" The man looked him over, not rudely at first, which somehow made it worse. His eyes moved from Ethan's worn coat to Ranger, then passed them into the room, taking in the swept aisles, the stacked books, the thermos on the table, the file box half covered with a towel. "Grant Halverson," he said, offering no hand. "This property is private and condemned." Ethan kept one hand on the doorframe. "Condemned by who?" Grant smiled the kind of smile that had more paperwork than warmth in it. "The County Inspection Board. The report is public record. Roof failure risk, foundation concerns, unsafe access, environmental hazards. I'm surprised anyone could even get inside." "Door was open. That doesn't make it yours." Ethan felt Ranger shift beside him. Not forward, just present. Never said it did. Grant reached into a leather folder and removed a folded notice sealed in plastic against the rain. He held it out. Ethan took it and read the top line twice. Notice of demolition 30 days. Mercer Free Library, future site of Halverson Square Lofts. The letters stayed sharp on the page, but the room behind them blurred for half a second. 30 days. That was how cleanly a town could erase 90 years. No shouting, no fire, just a date, a signature, and a machine scheduled for later. Grant glanced toward the brass plaque Ethan had cleaned. "I understand these old places carry sentimental weight. Believe me, my family has history here. But sentiment doesn't stabilize a roof." Ethan folded the paper carefully. "Neither does pretending nobody ever needed this place." Grant's eyes narrowed with mild annoyance, the way a man reacts when a chair has been moved from where he expected it. "Ashford Creek needs investment. Jobs, housing, something useful." The word useful entered the room and settled there like cold ash. Ethan looked at the shelves, at the old flag, at the hidden room door now covered again but not forgotten. He thought of Samuel Mercer's handwriting, Maggie's face over the soup mug, the ledger of men and women who had walked through this door, carrying papers they could not understand, and left standing a little straighter. "This place was useful before your company had a logo," he said. Grant's smile disappeared. "You have no legal standing here, Mr. Walker." Ethan did not ask how Grant knew his name. Men with folders usually knew more than they pretended. Maybe not. Then I suggest you gather your belongings and leave before this becomes a sheriff's matter. The shame came first, old and obedient. Ethan felt it rise in him, urging him to apologize for taking up space, for needing shelter, for being found in a place someone else wanted empty. Then Ranger stepped closer, shoulder touching Ethan's leg. The contact was small, but it steadied something deep. Ethan looked Grant in the eye. Call whoever you need to call. For the first time, Grant seemed uncertain, not afraid, just surprised that the man before him had not folded neatly into the category prepared for him. He slipped the folder under his arm. 30 days, he said. After that, this building comes down. He turned and walked back to the truck. Ethan watched until the taillights disappeared down the hill. Only then did he let the notice lower to his side. Maggie arrived an hour later, carrying coffee and bad news in equal measure. She read the demolition order without speaking, then placed it flat on the oak table, as if it were something that might bite. "We need Ruth," she said. Ethan looked toward the hidden room. Ranger was already standing beside the west wall, ears lifted, waiting. "Then we show her everything," Ethan said. Outside, the town moved through another ordinary morning. Inside Mercer Free Library, 30 days had begun to count down. Judge Ruth Bellamy did not arrive like someone coming to be impressed. She came just after 4, driving an old gray Buick that looked as if it had argued with every winter in Pennsylvania, and won by stubbornness alone. She was 76, small frame but straight-backed, wearing a navy coat, leather gloves, and the expression of a woman who had spent a lifetime watching people decorate lies until they resembled truth. Maggie opened the door for her, but Ruth paused on the threshold, taking in the room before she stepped inside. Her eyes moved over the swept floor, the cleaned brass plaque, the shelves, the cracked flag, Ethan standing near the table with his hands at his sides, and Ranger sitting beside him with the calm attention of a witness. "So," Ruth said, her voice dry as paper, "this is the emergency." Maggie gave Ethan a look that said, "Let her be like this." Ethan nodded once. "Mom." Ruth removed her gloves finger by finger. "Don't mom me unless you're about to waste my time." Ethan almost smiled, then didn't. He led her to the oak table where Samuel Mercer's journal, the ledgers, photographs, and legal letters were laid out in careful rows. He had washed his hands twice before touching them, though the sink water still ran brown at first. Ruth leaned over the documents without sitting. For several minutes, the only sounds were the faint ticking of the old walls and Ranger's slow breathing. She read one page, then another. Her face did not soften, but something in her stillness sharpened. "Where did you find these?" "Behind the west wall," Ethan said. "Hidden room." Ranger found the draft first. Ruth glanced at the dog. Of course he did. Maggie poured coffee into 3 chipped mugs and placed one near Ruth. Ruth ignored it until she reached the first bundle of letters marked Legal Correspondence, 1931. Then she sat down. That was when Ethan understood the documents had stopped being interesting and started being dangerous. Ruth read for nearly an hour. She asked questions without looking up. Who had owned the land? What company now held the deed? Had anyone from the county inspected the room? Had Grant Halverson seen the files? Ethan answered what he could. Maggie filled in town history, names half remembered from diner conversations and obituary clippings. Ruth finally opened the leather-bound journal and turned to the entry Ethan had marked. Her finger moved slowly beneath Samuel's handwriting. "A man who cannot read the paper placed before him is too easily robbed by someone smiling across the table." She read, not loudly, but with enough weight to make the room listen. Ethan watched her eyes stop at the next page. Ruth's mouth tightened. "Samuel Mercer," she said. "My mother used to say that name like it was a match she's not allowed to strike." Maggie leaned forward. "You know him? Know of him. That's different. Around here he was called unstable, war-damaged, embarrassment to a good family." Ruth turned another page. "Convenient words, usually." Ethan felt that sentence land somewhere close to his ribs. Ruth opened a file tied with blue cotton tape. Inside were copies of medical statements, letters from a private sanitarium outside Harrisburg, and a petition signed by 2 Mercer relatives requesting Samuel's removal from financial authority. Ruth read each page with the patience of a judge and the anger of a widow who had learned not to show it too soon. "He was evaluated as coherent," she said. "Cooperative. No evidence of delusion. No violent tendencies, no legal incompetence. The room seemed to grow colder, Maggie whispered. Then why did they keep him there? Ruth looked up. Because he was inconvenient. Ranger lifted his head. Ethan did not move. Ruth tapped the paper with one finger. There's a difference between broken and inconvenient. Powerful families have confused the two for centuries. She reached for another folded document, its edges fragile, its ink faded but legible. Her eyes narrowed. She read the first line, then the signature, then the notary mark. This time she did drink the coffee, one small swallow, as if steadying herself. This appears to be a trust instrument, she said. Ethan felt the room tilt slightly. Meaning Samuel Mercer may have placed this property into a charitable trust before his family had him committed. If this is authentic, every later transfer may be contestable. Maggie exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. Ethan looked toward the west wall, toward the hidden room, toward all the books that had waited in silence while men in offices decided they were worth less than a parking lot. Ruth gathered the papers into order. I'll need copies, a title search, county archives, and a notary who still has a spine. She stood, finally looking directly at Ethan. And you, Mr. Walker, will need to decide whether you are merely hiding in this library or standing for it. Ethan lowered his eyes to Ranger. The dog's amber gaze did not ask for courage. It assumed it was already there. Ethan touched Mason's dog tag through his coat pocket and looked back at Ruth. I'm standing. Ruth nodded once. Good. Then let's give the truth some weight. Ruth Bellamy returned before noon the next day with a canvas briefcase, a portable scanner, and the kind of silence that made ordinary conversation feel wasteful. Ethan had already cleared the oak table and laid a clean sheet over it, though clean was a generous word in a building where dust had been waiting longer than most people remembered. Maggie brought coffee, tape, folders, and a box of pastries nobody admitted to wanting until the room smelled faintly of sugar and butter. They worked without ceremony. Ruth scanned documents. Maggie labeled copies in her careful diner handwriting. Ethan held pages flat with fingertips that had spent half a lifetime tightening bolts and patching leaks, now suddenly afraid of tearing history. Ranger stayed near the west wall. At first, Ethan thought the dog was only tired. The rain had made his bad leg stiff again, and the cold found him easily in the old building. But then came the sound. Scratch, pause, scratch. Ethan looked over his shoulder. Ranger stood in the hidden room doorway, nose down, paw resting against one floorboard beneath Samuel Mercer's desk. Not again, Ethan said softly. Ruth did not look up from the scanner. When that dog scratches, I suggest you listen. Ranger scratched once more, not harder, just certain. Ethan knelt beside him. The board was narrow, darker than the others, its nail heads blackened with age. He ran his fingers along the seam and felt the slightest give. Someone had lifted it before, maybe once, maybe 90 years ago. With Ruth watching now, he slid the flathead screwdriver into the gap and worked slowly, careful not to split the wood. The board rose with a tired pop. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, sat a small tin box the color of old rain. No lock, just a folded strip of canvas tied around it. Ethan lifted it with both hands and placed it on the desk. For a moment, no one moved. Some discoveries arrived loud. This one arrived like a held breath. Ruth untied the canvas. Inside were 4 things. A signed deed of trust dated October 17, 1931. A letter sealed but never mailed. A photograph wrapped in tissue. And a small brass key darkened by time. Ruth picked up the deed first. Her eyes moved line by line, slower than before. Maggie stopped pretending to sort folders. Ethan stood with one hand on Ranger's head, feeling the old dog's steady warmth beneath his palm. This is it, Ruth said. Her voice was low, almost unwilling to disturb the paper. This is the executed version. Signed, witnessed, notarized. Samuel Mercer transferred the library property to a charitable trust for public education, veterans assistance, labor literacy, and community refuge. Ethan heard the words, but it took a moment for them to become real. Public education, veterans assistance, labor literacy, community refuge. Not an abandoned building, not future lofts. A promise. Ruth opened the letter next. The paper had yellowed, but Samuel's handwriting remained strong. She read aloud, not all of it, only enough. To whoever still believes a man is more than what he has lost. Her voice caught on the word lost, not dramatically, but just enough for Ethan to look at her and remember she too had buried someone who came home changed. Ruth continued. This library was never built for the powerful. They already had rooms where people listened. I built this for those who came home and could not sleep, for those who worked until their bodies failed, for those who signed papers they were never taught to read, and for every person ever made to feel ashamed for needing help. If this place survives me, let it remind the town of one thing: no human being becomes worthless because they need another hand. Maggie turned away first, wiping at the corner of her eye with the back of her wrist, irritated with herself for doing it. Ethan could not speak. He looked down at Ranger, who simply leaned heavier against his leg, as if the dog had known all along that the room had not been hiding treasure. It had been protecting a voice. The photograph showed Samuel Mercer standing on the library steps beside men in work coats, women in plain dark dresses, a few older veterans wearing medals on tired jackets, and a wooden sign above them that read, "Reading hours after shift." Nobody in the photograph looked rich. Nobody looked important in the way newspapers meant important, but every face looked awake, seen, named. Ruth placed the deed into a protective sleeve with hands that had stopped shaking only because she would not allow them to. "Grant Halverson needs to see this," she said. "Not because he deserves it, because the truth should enter through the front door." Grant came that evening, called by Ruth, not invited by Ethan. He arrived guarded, impatient, carrying his confidence like a polished briefcase. But as Ruth laid out the deed, the medical letters, the sanitarium reports, and finally Samuel's letter, something in Grant's face changed, not all at once. First annoyance, then calculation, then a pale, unsettled quiet. "My grandmother said Samuel was unstable," he murmured. Ruth looked at him over her glasses. Families often rename guilt so the next generation can inherit property without inheriting shame. Grant stared at the photograph for a long time. When he finally reached toward the tin box, Ranger rose and stepped between him and the desk. No growl, no threat, just a boundary. Grant withdrew his hand. Ethan met his eyes. Neither man spoke. Outside, dusk settled over Ashford Creek. Inside Mercer Free Library, the past had finally found enough witnesses to stop being a rumor. The demolition order did not disappear with a thunderclap. It died the way many wrong things die, when the right paper finally reaches the right desk. Slowly, reluctantly, under fluorescent lights, with stamps, signatures, phone calls, and men clearing their throats before admitting what they should have seen years ago. Judge Ruth Bellamy filed the trust deed with the county, attached Samuel Mercer's medical records, the sanitarium letters, the title history, and a sworn statement describing the hidden room. For 3 days, Ashford Creek talked about little else. At the Maple Rail Diner, coffee cooled in mugs, while people remembered stories their parents had half told and they had half believed. At the post office, old names resurfaced. At the barber shop, men who had not spoken of their father's factory injuries in decades suddenly remembered envelopes, forms, and long evenings under the library lamps. Grant Halverson was not forgiven, because forgiveness was not a ribbon a town could tie around a hard truth and call it pretty. But he came back. That mattered. He arrived without the wool coat, without the leather folder, without the polished look of a man bringing an ending. He stood inside Mercer Free Library with rainwater on his shoulders and a cardboard tube tucked beneath one arm. Ethan watched him from behind the oak table. Ranger sat beside the brass plaque, calm but alert. "The demolition permit has been withdrawn," Grant said. His voice sounded smaller in the room than it had on the steps. "The development company is releasing any claim pending the court's review of the trust." Maggie, standing near the card catalog, folded her arms. "That your idea or Ruth's boot on your neck?" Ruth, seated at the table with her glasses low on her nose, did not look up. "My boots are orthopedic." Grant almost smiled, then didn't. He unrolled the cardboard tube. Inside were architectural drawings not for lofts, but for roof repair, electrical safety, plumbing restoration, and an accessibility ramp at the front entrance. "My family took enough from this place," he said. "I can pay to keep the roof over it." Quietly. Ethan looked at the plans, then at Grant. Not quietly. Grant's jaw tightened. Ethan's voice remained even. "If you help in daylight. No plaque with your name, no speech about generosity, just the truth on record." For a long moment, Grant stared at the old floorboards. Then he nodded. "Fair." The work began the following week, not grandly. Grand things are often too proud to last. It began with ladders, buckets, donated lumber, retired electricians, union carpenters, 2 plumbers who argued like brothers, and Maggie carrying trays of sandwiches through the front door as if feeding a crew were a civic office. Ethan became the person everyone looked to before moving a shelf or lifting a board. At first, the attention made his skin prickle. He was used to being unnoticed, or worse, assessed. But the library needed hands, and he had hands. It needed someone who understood old buildings did not like being rushed. He showed volunteers how to brace the weak west wall, how to label boxes, how to clean books with soft cloth instead of good intentions. Ranger supervised from wherever the light fell warmest, rising only when Ethan pushed too long and needed a wet nose against his wrist to remind him that pride was not a substitute for rest. By the first snow, the sign had been repainted, not replaced, repainted. Ethan insisted on that. Some scars deserved to remain visible beneath the new coat. The brass plaque was polished and mounted beside a second one that read, Samuel Mercer, House of Reading and Veterans Resource Library. For those who served, labored, and were forgotten. Opening morning came pale and cold. People lined the steps in winter coats, not as a crowd hungry for ceremony, but as neighbors who had finally remembered an address. Ruth spoke for less than 2 minutes, which everyone later agreed was the finest speech in county history. Maggie cried and denied it. Grant stood near the back, hat in hand, while an elderly machinist touched Samuel's photograph with 2 fingers and whispered, "My father came here." Ethan unlocked the front door with the small brass key Ranger had found beneath the floor. The lock turned stiffly, then gave. The sound was simple, final, beautiful. Inside, the library smelled of pine cleaner, old paper, fresh paint, and coffee. There were tables for legal forms, shelves for veterans' benefits guides, repair manuals, local history, grief, work, dignity. There was a desk where anyone could bring a letter they did not understand and leave with someone having read it beside them, not over them. Ethan had a small office in the back now, though he still preferred the oak table. On the wall above his desk hung Mason Reed's dog tag in a plain frame, beside a photograph of Samuel Mercer, and a new photograph of Ranger sitting proudly beneath the open sign. That evening, after everyone left, Ethan stood in the doorway while snow moved softly through the maples. Ranger leaned against his leg, older than yesterday somehow, but steady. Ethan touched the key in his palm, then the dog tag beneath his shirt. "They took the house, boy," he said quietly, "but they didn't take the part of us that still knows how to build one." Ranger looked up at him, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan did not feel like a man who had been allowed to stay. He felt like a man who had been trusted to keep the light on. If this story moved you, give it a like, subscribe for more heartfelt stories, and tell us which moment stayed with you the most. Also, where are you watching from tonight? Leave your city or country in the comments.